Niner Faithful. Brayden here from the Niner Power Podcast. I run the Instagram page 49ers Coverage, joined here by
Raj Malwani from our SF49ers on Instagram and Twitter. We're here with the Niner Power Podcast.
Moving on to the defensive side of the ball here, we have another controversial topic for many players in the secondary. So we'll start with that. The 49ers taking 9 DBs this year.
Yeah, they took 9 overall, but there was some breaking news as we were doing this, and we'll get to it. So overall, let's go down the defensive backs, corners, and safeties and go through it. So they kept Richard Sherman, of course, cornerback, Akello Witherspoon, Jimmy Ward, who can play the nickel corner spot or safety, Tarvarius Moore, K'Wan Williams, who is still dealing with his knee injury, but his rehab is ramping up, should be back soon, Jason Verrett, who will be practicing this week and is has a high chance of playing week 1, Emmanuel Mosley, and DJ Reed. Those were your defensive backs. Today, they brought back Antone Exum, and they placed Kentavious Street on the injured reserve, and Exum was the guy they brought in to make the spot. So I think we have a good crew. I think they did the right job. I think they brought in the guys they needed. Marcel Harris was the guy that was kind of left out, and people were a little upset, but he was brought back today on the practice squad. I like Harris. Hard worker, a very high energy, spark plug kind of guy. And with the injury history to guys like Ward and Tart. And I forgot to mention Jaquaski Tart, sorry. With the guys like Ward and Tart, injuries huge. You can bring up Harris if you need him. And they do have Exum, who can play both safety positions. He's very versatile.
In the earlier podcast, too, we were talking about Tarvarius Moore, another guy who made this 53 that we were mentioning, that should. And that was one of those battles between him and Colbert, and ultimately Tarvarius Moore won that. What are your thoughts on Colbert getting cut there?
So again, as you mentioned, we were really high on Tarvarius Moore, and he showcased that he can play safety at a high level. That's his natural position, and he won it straight, fair and simple. He put in the work, and he showed he was the better of the two. Unfortunately for Colbert, I think Colbert was a player of circumstances, kind of like Matthews, where in his circumstances were injuries. He had the hamstring strain several weeks ago. Then he re-aggravated it this week. He didn't really get a chance to showcase himself. Kind of a tough break. And then with Tarvarius Moore kind of taking that next step and showcasing what he can do, it kind of put the writing on the wall for Colbert, who very, very great, good guy. He's a class act. If you went on his Twitter the other night, after he got cut, he thanked the fans, thanked the organization. Very humbling of him to do that. Not everybody does that after you get cut. You know, you can be a little upset, but he's a very good player, very fan favorite type guy. A lot of fans loved him, and for him to do that, that was big. That speaks volumes. I know a lot of fans are upset, but again, John Lynch and Shanahan want the best 53 men on this team, and you can't argue with Tarvarius Moore. He showed that he was the better of the two.
For sure, and like I said, he was balling out in training camp with all those interceptions. I believe he had a few pick sixes as well. So we'll see what he can bring to the table against first stringers, some players that he's never played against. So we'll see how comfortable he is. And moving on to our linebackers, taking 5 linebackers in Alexander, Warner, rookie Dre Greenlaw, Nazacha, and Ashez Al-Shahir.
Very young linebacking crew, and I think they are going to be a good linebacking core. I think they're energetic, they're fast to the ball, and with Robert Salah, he preaches all gas and no brakes, and these guys have all gas and literally no brakes. They are fast guys. I like the guy Al-Shahir. He worked hard. He's an interesting story. This guy Al-Shahir, not a lot of people know about Al-Shahir. He played at FAU, Florida Atlantic, FAU. He was their leading tackler. But in his senior year, he suffered a torn ACL and MCL, missed the year. So that's why he kind of slipped in the draft. He went undrafted. He posted on his Instagram the other day that he was he grew up homeless. He struggled his whole life, and now he finally found his dream of becoming an NFL player. That's a great story to hear. You love to hear it. But he's a good player. He showcased a lot of talent. I feel they didn't want to cut him, because if they would have cut him, some team might have snagged him up. They would have saw him. So they ended up keeping him. And the big surprise was Elijah Lee and maybe David Mayo. But Elijah Lee ended up coming back to the practice squad, so that's nice. And Demetrius Flanagan Fowles as a linebacker, was added to the practice squad. So those two guys are good. Elijah Lee had a thumb injury. I think at some point he can get back onto this active roster if injuries or something open the door. And David Mayo, I think he was another player that was a casualty of circumstances. Nez Ochoa played great the last two games. That interception in that final game against the Chargers, I think, sealed the deal, put him on the roster. And he's a special teams player. Mayo was also a special teams player, so you pick between Nez Ochoa and Mayo. Nez Ochoa's been on the team longer, so they go with the loyal. They kind of were loyal to him.
Yeah, and that's fair. We saw how much speed was brought to the table. I mean, Fred Warner and Quan are just all gas, like you mentioned. So I'm excited to see how fast they can be and how quick they are to tackle. And rookie Dre Greenlaw with the big hits. It's just a thunder brought back to the linebacking core this year.
Yeah, for sure, man. The linebacking core looks like they might be one of those dangerous groups in the league if they can get it all together. Fred Warner and Quan Alexander have great energy together. You can already tell they got chemistry. They were flying everywhere on that first game they played together. So I'm excited. I think Alexander, as he gets his footing back from that ACL, he'll get better and better. Fred Warner looks like he's going to take a huge jump this season in his second year. And Dre Greenlaw could be the starting Sam linebacker. He's really good against the run. He needs to improve a little bit against the pass, but he's young. He's still learning the system. But he's got speed and he has heart and character. And that's the thing with all these guys. They're all good character guys on the linebacking crew. So I love this group.
Yeah, I do as well. I can't argue with any of the picks there as well. So moving on down to the D line in Buckner, Bosa, Ford, Armstead, Thomas, Jones, Blair, Street, Taylor, and Day.
Man, I got chills when you read that to me. That's intimidating. 5 first rounders.
There's 10, and even reading the first half of it, you're just already like, holy, when's this going to
Oh,
end?
man. Could you imagine how stout that line is going to be when they finally are together? And it looks like Bosa and Ford are looking like they're ready to play. You know, Ford came back to practice. He said his knee feels good. They were very cautious all off season, and they allowed these players to heal. And I think that was a big key. And Ford will be back. Nick Bosa practices this week, and they're going to see how his ankle goes. You got DeForest Buckner, who's in a contract year. Arik Armstead, who's, playing great now that he's healthy. And Solomon Thomas, who's got a new mindset. And the backups aren't bad. You got DJ Jones. You got Julian Taylor. And you have a Sheldon Day. Those guys are good. As far as Kentavious Street, he was placed on the injured reserve. But hey, maybe he comes back, during the middle of the season. We'll see. They did a little knee scope on his knee, and he could come back later. So overall, great D-line. Could be one of the best in the league if they can live up to their potential. It's a scary defensive line.
For sure, and even from a non-biased standpoint, you have DeForest Buckner and Nick Bosa. We all know what Nick Bosa is capable of, and even with D Ford, you can't put words to describing D Ford, Bosa, and Buckner besides demolition and just absolute terror.
It's insane. And, a lot of talk yesterday was the Seahawks signing Clowney. They have a great front seven, this and that. But you have to still think that the 49ers have one of the better defensive lines because with that potential, with DeForest Buckner last season, he really didn't have much help on the edge. And now you give him Bosa and Ford, that's just going to be intimidating. And with the guy like Mitch Wishnowsky at the punter, who's booming 62-yard punts, our field position is going to be great. We're going to have all this pressure up front. Quarterbacks are going to be uncomfortable, and that's a cause for turnovers and sacks and maybe even a safety if we pin them deep enough. So this defensive line is really, really going to be strong. I don't think people are talking about them enough, but I think eventually, once they see how everything starts cooking, people are going to be like, oh, man, they got a really dominating D-line.
I think we can even make some bold statements on guessing how many safeties we're going to get this year. I think we can personally get 3 or 4 safeties this year if we really bow down and just grind and get to that QB and get them in the end zone. I think it's possible.
I think 4 is a good number, and I think we could go over 50 sacks. I know that's a crazy number, but I think we could go over 50 sacks. This team has sack potential on the defense, and this could be honestly the best defensive line in the league. I know I'm talking because as a fan, but at the same time, no bias. This defensive line has potential to be the best in the league if they can live up to their potential. But of course, we have to see them play. We have to see them get that chemistry going. And at the end of the day, they have to stay healthy. 100% have to stay healthy.
For sure. And the other day, D Ford also tweeted out, said, "Did you watch the Browns game?" And the Browns versus the Bucks, and the Browns got, I believe it was 5 sacks in the first quarter or first half. they're ready. They just want to swarm Winston and make his week 1 just a rough one.
Yeah, that's it. I was thinking about that tweet too. I posted on my page the other day of how D Ford was just saying, you saw that game against Cleveland, alluding to Tampa Bay, like you said, and 5 sacks in the first half by the starting defensive line of Cleveland. Can you imagine what San Francisco is going to do? They have that mindset right now that they just want to go and hit the quarterback, and that's a dangerous mindset to play against for any offense that we face. So I'm excited for this defensive line. Speaking of linemen, though, we have to switch gears because we didn't talk about it yet. Let's talk about the offensive line that the 49ers decided to go with on the 53-man squad, the flip side of the D-line. We
sure.
have Joe Staley, the legend, the left tackle, staple on our offensive line. And then you have his buddy, his best friend, the second year, Mike McGlinchey, who looks like he's ready to have a huge second year. Then you have the guards, Lakin Tomlinson and Mike Person, and at center, Weston Richburg, who we talked about last week in the podcast, how he's come back from a knee injury. He played through a lot of pain in his knee last year, and now he's healthy. And this is going to be huge. I think Weston Richburg is the most key part of this O-line. And then as the reserves, you have Ben Garland, who can play center. You have Justin Skule, the rookie. They opted to keep him. Again, you cut a rookie that makes you look bad as a front office, and at the end of the day, you keep Skule because you want him to keep developing. He can play that swing tackle position. Maybe eventually you take him under the wing of Staley and McGlinchey and develop him. And then you have Dan Brunskill, who can be the backup anything, really. He's very versatile. He can play tackle, guard, center. He's almost like a Swiss Army knife is what John Lynch alluded to, and that's what he said. He kept him because he's very versatile. I feel like we're thin on depth, but we have a pretty good starting O-line. But the depth definitely is a little shaky there. But on the practice squad, they brought back Ross Reynolds, and they signed this guy, Ryan Pope, offensive tackle. He was released by the Lions yesterday, I believe. Undrafted rookie this year, and out of San Diego State. This guy is 6'7", 230 pounds. That's a massive player. So you never know. They have this guy they can develop on the practice squad for their O-line.
And there seems to be a trend that I'm picking up here on Kyle Shanahan's thoughts on versatile players. We have basically one on every single core of this team. So definitely that to be looking at in Brunskill, James, Mostert, Exum. Very interesting to look at it like that.
That's a very good observation, actually, because what happened last season, we had 20 players on the injured reserve, and the year before, there was about 20 injured reserve players. So with injuries, you have to have players that can fill a spot. When you have guys that are versatile, it's easier to fill a spot, and their quality depth at those positions. So in a pinch, you can throw somebody in at a spot at last minute. Kyle Juszczyk, he could play fullback and tight end. If you need a guy like Exum to play free safety, he can play it. If you need him to play strong safety, he can play DJ Reed. We have talked about him. DJ Reed, he can play kick returner. He could play nickel corner. He could play on the outside. He could even play safety if you want. So versatility is very key, and that's a great observation you made there. That brings us to our final players on the roster, rounding it out. You have to have your special teamers, right? You have Robbie Gould, the kicker. You have Mitch Wishnowsky, the punter. And you have Colin Holba, the long snapper. And Holba's in because Kyle Nelson, the original starting long snapper, is suspended for performance-enhancing drug use for 10 games. So that'll be something they'll have to debate on if they're going to keep Colin Holba or drop him and bring back Kyle Nelson when his suspension's over. So that's a little bit thing we will keep an eye on as the season goes. Robbie Gould, arguably the best field goal kicker in the league. And Mitch Wishnowsky, he's proving himself this offseason. And I think we have a very good kicker tandem, and they can continue to just show themselves throughout the year.
And this is definitely one of the picks that is living up to his hype because early drafted Mitch Wishnowsky has already proven that he can bomb the ball down the field. And he also wants to get into the play too, throwing that tackle against the Broncos there. So, I mean, he's everything. He's everything you ever asked for out of a fourth-round pick.
Very, very true. He's so far living it up. And that field position is going to be very key for this defense. And with Robbie Gould, you know what you're going to get. He's very consistent. You see a lot of these field goal kickers missing field goals. And Robbie Gould doesn't do that. And in clutch situations, when your game is on the line, you want someone that you know is going to deliver that field goal kick and win the game. And Robbie does that. And the team, it was a long journey this offseason. There was a lot of controversies following Robbie Gould. Will he get traded? Will he not play for the Niners? I do credit Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch for not pressuring him. And at the end of the day, I think that really was the key in bringing Robbie Gould back. He said it. He goes, they didn't pressure me. They let me do what I had to do. And I respected them for that. And that right there speaks volumes of this front office. Is they knew they could bring the guy back when they needed to. Of course, they paid him a good amount of money to bring him back. But they didn't pressure him. They let him live his life. They said, you know what, do what you have to do this offseason. When the time comes to make a decision, we'll be there. And they ended up making the decision, and he chose coming back for the Niners, and that's a key. He's a very important player for this team, and I'm glad we got Robbie Gould back. And that's our 53-man roster. I'm very happy for it overall.
Very happy with it too. There's nothing that I would specifically change. It all makes sense when you really look at it, but there's always going to be speculation, and can't argue that.
Of course, there's always speculation, and you never know. There could be things down the line that happen. You never know. So this may not be the end of moves and things like that, and we'll see how it goes. But overall, next week, we got week 1 against Tampa Bay, and I can't wait to preview that with you later this week. It's going to be a fun game. Our first regular season game of the year. I can't believe it's finally here.
Yeah, we've waited 9 months, and it's only 1 week left, so
we're
laughing now. Let's go.
I know. You remember how long we were crying about how the season is never going to start, and now a week away. I'm kind of not ready, actually.
Yeah, it's caught me off guard. Preseason flew by, and now we're already in week 1. There's already been 6 weeks of football, so let's go for it.
I'm excited. You know how it goes, Niner Power. Well, that's another episode of the Niner Power podcast. I hope everybody enjoyed. Bang, bang, Niner Gang.
Thanks so much for watching.